Well, I'm having trouble making sense of the document because, again, I know President Trump and I'm familiar with his personal views and what he would like to see happen. That's fine. But that's not a strategy. The strategy is if you're going to disengage from the Ukraine debacle, how do you do it? Do you, and he's always taken the position, I think, in his mind, that he's at the center of the universe, that he is the leader of the greatest, most powerful force on earth. Okay, sounds good. It's not true, but that's what people believe. So what do? Do you summon all of the European vassal state leaders to the White House? They all sit around in front of you and wait for you to express your views, and then they try to lobby you for whatever it is that they want. That's not really how you do business. That's if you want to put forward an idea, you have to have a strategic framework. That's why I see none at all. How do we end up disengaging from Ukraine and simultaneously preparing to invade Venezuela? I mean, somebody said, well, we've been trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela now for at least 20 years. Some people would argue longer. All right. It hasn't worked. Why are we now building a military force for the purpose of making this happen? Well, that's not really what we want to do. Well, if that's not what you want to do, what are you doing? Are you trying to extract concessions? Are you trying to push the Chinese and Russian investments out of the country? And what are you offering if that is done? I mean, what is the plan? Glenn, I don't see any plan. I don't see any strategy. And I think the Europeans have a right to be frustrated by that. But keep in mind that they haven't been helpful. Just as they have taken a position that you have to fight to the last Ukrainian, defend every inch of ground, return everything to Ukraine. They pretended this Ukraine construct was always something much more than it was. Ukraine's never been a nation state. This was just a construct created by Lenin to satisfy the needs of the Soviet state system, which he devised to enhance Bolshevik control and influence. Now, it doesn't mean there were no Ukrainians. It doesn't mean there aren't Ukrainians. But the point is, nobody has sat down and looked at this thing objectively and said, well, how do we sort this child? How do we come out of this? How do we avoid future conflict? It's as though everyone wants perpetual conflict. And I think you can make an argument for that. The ruling globalist class in Europe wants conflict against Russia. Now Trump has said he doesn't. But at the same time, he's got a Congress that is bought and paid for by other interests. I mean, sometimes when I look at the Senate, I think there are African warlords that have a greater sense of obligation and devotion to the country that they live in than the people that are in the Senate or the House. They're all receiving so much cash from so many different donors and so many different sources of influence that the notion that there is a national interest is lost. So at this point, even Trump's assertions of what I want to do are meaningless because there's no path to get there. There's no readiness to follow it on the hill. So where are we headed, Glenn? I think we're headed right now nowhere. I think events will continue to happen to us. We will react. We will not initiate.
Well, what do you think? Because I agree, though. There's this interesting interview where Orban sits next to Trump, and he makes the point that the Europeans were initially very cautious in terms of going to war, or at least indirect war, now more direct against Russia. But he said Biden got them all riled up and ready to finally break the back of Russia. But now, of course, the Europeans are so deep into this that there's no reverse button. They just continue going on, even though the Americans are pulling back. But it does beg the question of where all this is going with Europe. Do you think Europe could be heading towards collapse? Are they preparing for actual war with Russia, or is this posturing? Because while the rhetoric of the Europeans keep escalating, the Russians are also responding to this now. They not just anger. I mean, they can be angry and still have some objective view of what's the best approach. But beyond any anger, they also now increasingly see Europe as the main enemy. Europe, which essentially set Ukraine up for this, because again, if you go back to 2014, it was what 20% of Ukrainians who wanted to be a part of NATO. None of them wanted to fight against Russia. None of them wanted to cancel the the Russian language. And again, the whole war has been very much imposed to a large extent on the Ukrainians, and the Europeans are now seen as the main bad guy. So it looks like we're heading possibly somewhere quite dangerous, and it's not unlikely that the Russians will be more prepared now to retaliate, especially if they see the Americans having less enthusiasm for Europe.
Well, I don't think most Americans are even remotely connected to Europe from a purely national security standpoint. Most of them don't know anything about NATO. Most are not aware of the distribution of our armed forces all the way around the world. I mean, they know they're out there, but beyond that, they don't know much about it. The war machine that we built is largely gone rogue. It has continued to expand and increase itself without much consultation with the American people, and the American people haven't been engaged. So I think there are two sides to this. You have a lot of people in my generation and older who are horrified, who believe that if the Europeans are not somehow or another stabilized by our political, military, and economic influence, that they will fall out with each other and go back to war. Literally, there are people that believe that we have this long-term interest in helping Europe avoid that, and that we somehow or another have to herd the cats, as I said at the beginning. I don't share that view. I never have. I felt very strongly in the early 1990s, after we returned from the Gulf, that it was time for us to get out. This is going to sound like a cliche, but it's time to let the Europeans be Europeans. I think the Europeans have taken a very unhealthy approach, and that approach has been to emulate us, try to imitate our foolishness in so many ways. I don't think the massive migration that came out of North Africa and the Middle East that started in 2015 would have occurred if we were not in Europe. I think the Europeans would have defended their borders. I think they would have defended their countries, their culture, their civilization. And that's part of what I think Donald Trump was trying to say in this national security document. We have advertised ourselves as the model for everyone else. Just look at us. We're so fortunate. We have this wonderful economy. And oh, by the way, we have all these different people from all these different places, and we're all harmonious, love each other, and get along. Well, that's not true. Anybody who spends any time in the United States and really knows the place knows that we are very seriously divided along many lines: cultural, racial, ethnic, religious. So the notion that we're some sort of paradise where everyone magically leaves their unhappiness and baggage at the door, enters into the United States, and lives in paradise is wrong. One of the biggest problems we have right now is there are 52 million people in the United States living here who were not born in the United States. Now, why is that a problem? Because they're not Americans. Now, how many of them came here to become Americans? It's hard to tell. We have perhaps 30 million or more so-called illegals. I think they may have come here to benefit from our largesse and free health care and housing and so forth, if they can get it. I haven't seen much evidence that most of them are interested in being Americans. They don't even know what that means. So we're in a difficult position ourselves. And the bad news about this national security document is that it depicts Europe as something that is radically different from us, that is full of all these problems and difficulties and divisions, but we share them. We're in very much the same boat. That's the pathetic humor in all of this, tragically. We're in very much the same boat. And then the second piece that doesn't come up for discussion is the financial disaster. The printing press has killed us. We've been printing fiat currency since 1973, almost nonstop. Got a problem, can't solve it, industry's at risk, print more money, more liquidity into the system, save the banks, keep it going. That's what we did in 2007 and 2008. And at the time, everybody said, wait a minute, if we don't allow failures, what Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, used to talk about as creative destruction, nothing will change. Well, gosh, Glenn, nothing changed. We just subsidized everything. Well, we're running up to this cliff now where we can't subsidize anymore. In fact, people think we've already gone over the cliff. But I see evidence that we're going to try and do that, and it will happen until we cannot. Does that mean the currency is debased? Probably. Are we going to end up like the Weimar Republic? There's a very high probability of that occurring right now. And then the question is, what do you do? If you cannot go to a gold standard or silver standard or some kind of standard, what do you do? Do you go into digital currency? Well, you're not going to get this digital currency we're inventing that means one coin equals $1. Who wants that? That's a waste of money. So Bitcoin is a very different animal that's going to become, I think, increasingly attractive to people. Will that work? I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that there are two parts to this. One is coming to terms with our own strategic reality as well as the European strategic reality. The second part of it is, what can we ultimately afford to do? And the truth is, not much. That's our problem. So it doesn't matter if you want 12 aircraft carrier battle groups. You may not be able to afford 6 or even 4 or 5. And do they make any sense in any case in this world today? I mean, these are the things that are absent from this national security document, but they affect all of us.